to the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast, coming to you from pristineauction.com studios with your hosts, Jake Ciely, Chris Meaney, and Joe Holka.
Welcome, footballers. It's week two. Week two of DFS to get you ready for hopefully cash last week's. Hopefully all your lineups smashed and all your tournaments cashed or something like that. I don't know. Is that too cliche, too stupid?
Joe Holka, just made that up.
Did I just make that up?
I like it.
I like it though.
Because you can't let maybe all your cash smash and your lineups. No, I'll go with what I said the first time. I think that sounded better.
Work in progress.
How was your guys' first weeks?
Go ahead, Joe. I know you had a pretty solid week. Yeah.
It was looking really good early, I think, until that second defensive touchdown for the 49ers, and then that overtime game was going to be probably in the neighborhood of like a 5-figure score, which would have been great. Dropped not out of the cash line, so can't complain for sure. But at the stakes I was at, I was looking a lot better at one point of the day than the very end.
Yeah, the listeners on the show know I'm a big cash game player. I love tournaments, of course. I like the thought of just winning like life-changing money, but I am a cash game player, and last week was, I think a pretty good start for us. I mean, we talked about Lamar Jackson, Evan Ingram, Jake, I know you were high on. We mentioned him, and we had Austin Eckler in there, Chris Carson, guys finding the end zone, and even Mark Ingram. So it was a pretty good week one. I'll take it.
It was. I should have stuck with the lineup that we had going head to head because I was much better when I had Josh Allen in there.
Well, you had Ingram. You were the only one with Ingram in your final lineup. That he had a monster game, and we all had CMC.
No, I took him out too.
Yeah. Oh, you took him out too. Okay. Well,
this is why you guys shouldn't tinker. I don't know. Well, real quick before we jump into week two. Your guys' thought process on that, because usually when I get there to Sunday morning, I start tinkering. It rarely ever pays off. I should have just always stuck with what I had.
Yeah, for me, I'm one of those people that does tinker until usually right at kickoff. Sometimes it burns me. Like last week in particular, I couldn't get comfortable because what I thought was the optimal lineup just had so much salary left over, like 600, 700, and it's a little bit out of what I try and do. So I ended up moving up at defense in order to play Curtis Samuel, which was the big mistake, right? I had San Francisco defense in my lineup most of the week as like the pay down option. Talked about that on, I think, almost every show I was on last week. So that one burned me, obviously, just the defense decision. I ended up moving up to the Browns, 0 points out of them. Shout out the Browns. But yeah,
everybody got stuck with that one.
Yeah, that killed me as well, Cleveland. I was back and forth on a couple. At one point, I had San Fran in my lineup, and I was like, nah, there's just no need. Like, I like Tampa so much that I'm just not going to go that way. And then they had more picks in week one than they had all of last season. So
yeah, from a tournament perspective, though, San Francisco has made so much sense, right? So like one of the things that I thought was super interesting, that in the 1500 on DraftKings, they were 22% owned. In the Millie Maker, they were like 3%. So like it was kind of a spot where, yeah, we thought they might get to Jameis. If everything goes wrong for the Jameis chalk, we should have probably been on San Fran just because of how poor that offensive line is in Tampa Bay. It just was a huge leverage spot, especially in large field stuff.
So a lot of terms you just threw out. You got to remember that this is the DFS for the rest of us, Joe. Like for everybody out there, but this is a good lesson for everybody. What Joe's talking about there for you guys is if there ever is a very heavy common play like Jameis Winston in the Bucs, which we're going to have some for this week. The tournament play to leverage is what you're saying is you go against it and you take the defense on the other side, maybe even a play on the other side is kind of you look at where the masses are going, and it's not like you want to put all of your lineups that way, but it's the same thing people usually do in baseball too. Like if everybody's stacking and using Clayton Kershaw one night, well, maybe you take the other lineup, or conversely, if everybody's on the Colorado Rockies playing in Colorado, well, maybe you take the pitcher on the other side, because if everything goes sideways for what we assume, you're so far ahead of everybody else because you took that contrarian play. But before we get into it, as a reminder for everybody, but I don't even know if I said it at the beginning. This is the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast, which I thought I made clear, but I think that's a good start. You know us, Jake Ciely, Joe Holka, Chris Meaney. Hopefully you're following Chris and Joe at Chris Meaney and at Joe Holka. I'm at All In Kid, where you can get more advice from us in case we don't get to players you thought we maybe should have talked about. Also, DFS Pass, 10% off with the name podcast, or the code podcast, I should say. So let's get into week two. And let's talk, what we do is always, hopefully, to get you some more cash in your bank account. So let's talk cash game lineups for week one.
Straight cash, homie.
Straight cash, homie. Should we go running backs? I feel like that's the That's more fun to talk about. I don't even let you. I'm deciding for you guys. We're talking running backs.
Just skipping QBs.
Well, now we're going to come back to QBs, but I wanted to go running backs first because that's always the meatier part of it. So running backs, Chris, you piped in first there. So I guess you can tell me who you're looking at.
Well, I really like the price of Josh Jacobs this week, and I feel like he'll be pretty chalky in tournaments. But I mean, on DraftKings at $4,700, and then on FanDuel at $65, this is what I call a free square. And I just loved last week just the usage that he got, a ton of usage. Like Jalen Richard was not involved in that game. Maybe he will be a little bit more this week when they're going to pass. But Josh Jacobs just had the one catch. I think he'll be more involved as well, in just the passing attack. And this is a pretty good matchup, really. I mean, you can run on Kansas City. They're probably going to have to throw the ball, and that will just get us a couple more catches. So $4,700 on DraftKings, you just plug him in. Again, 23 carries in his first NFL game. That was the second most of anybody last week. His 24 touches, third most. So I think there's a safe floor there with Jacobs and his price being, so low to start the season.
Joe, so because some people are watching the video and you can see the video, this was me during that game because I was running my victory laps around the house all day long on Josh Jacobs because Chris knows Josh Jacobs all day long, Darren Waller, It was a good first week. There was some misses. Like I definitely had
Tyrell too was nice. We talk about him a lot. Yeah.
Tyrell was very nice. Are you on Jacobs or to Chris's point? He is one of the most popular picks this week.
Yeah, I think he'll be probably the highest owned player overall. Wouldn't be surprising whatsoever.
Well, right now, like FanShares got him right behind Austin Eckler right now.
Yeah, I could see that. The price difference is definitely significant on DraftKings in particular. I mean, I don't know if I go as far as calling him a free square for tournaments as well. Like you mentioned his floor, I think his floor is super safe. His ceiling, if it allows you to get up to other things in your lineup, it makes total sense. But I, for one, kind of want to see what they do in a negative game script. I want to see how involved Jalen Richard is until I'm kind of ready to fully be in on something like that. But that's not typically my strategy anyway, to pay down for whatever it ends up being. Hopefully more than 15 touches, but maybe not, depending on what happens in this game as far as game flow is concerned. But yeah, I like him quite a bit. I think that I still guess, since it worked last week, I should just start at the top at running back, right? Last week, Christian McCaffrey was the first guy that I brought up. So now we're just going to go right back to the well with Alvin Kamara in the same matchup. I think that from what we saw from Christian McCaffrey last week, through the air, 11 targets, 10 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown. I definitely think that Kamara looked electric, and in week one, he could probably have a similar performance, I would hope. So I'm building around Alvin Kamara this week. I definitely understand where your head's at with Jacobs, though.
It's just a cash game thing for me,
for sure.
Yeah, and the fun thing about Kamara is he's second highest on FanDuel, but he's third. Another 500 drop off from Ezekiel Elliott on the full point PPR side of DraftKings, which is the real appeal. Because as you mentioned, we saw last week, the thing is yes, the Rams defense can be scary, but the one thing you do is you don't run into the teeth of them, which is why I'm a little bit off on Latavius Murray and seasonal, then obviously for not DFS, but you get him in space. To your point, you get Kamara, just Christian McCaffrey, you get him into space.
Yeah, and Jake also, like, 3 career games against the Rams, 5 touchdowns and 21 catches. I mean, he's really dominated this team, and it's one of the highest totals of the week. Yeah, it's real good. And so I think you can, to Joe's point, I think you can really bank on a few more catches in this game.
Are we completely off David Johnson?
No, I'm not completely off of him. I'd like him actually a little bit more in tournaments. Yeah, in cash I maybe. Yeah, in cash I maybe because of the matchup, but I feel most people will kind of shy away from him in tournaments because he's going up against a pretty solid defense in Baltimore. But you have to be very encouraged with his usage. Like, he got the carries. He looked like the DJ of old. He was involved in the passing game and the up-tempo offense they want to run. So I have no problem with DJ. I will shy away in cash.
I got one that I'm going to go lower the price wise. I'm dropping down to 6,200 on DraftKings and 6,800 on FanDuel. I see Joe looking at a screen. Are you trying to guess who I'm talking about?
I'm trying to.
Sony Michel. I don't care that it's cash. I feel he's a great play across the board because Sony Michel, all the hype and all the excitement for him this season was warranted because this offense should be one of the best in the league. I don't care if Antonio Brown's out there or not. I actually prefer if Antonio Brown is out there because, like LeGarrette Blount, Chris and I, you've talked about this with me on our show, is when LeGarrette Blount was out there a couple years ago, double-digit touchdowns, this could be a week not only as Sony Michel bounces back for what they wanted, but it could be one of his first double-digit touchdown games.
Yeah,
two. double-digit scores is what I said.
Are we banking on that though? Because let's just play the other side of it too. If he doesn't get those 2 touchdowns, what's his ceiling, right? Like, you think it's a game where he's going to carry the ball 25 times? I'm not just asking if that's kind of what you think. His price is pretty good, so I'm with you there.
No, I actually think you could probably. I'm okay with 15 to 20 carries because I think he's still going to be used a little bit in the passing game. I know everybody's concerned about Rex Burkhead, but this is still Sony Michel's backfield. It was just a bad week 1. People were jumping off the board to week 1. By the way, like I said, that'd be amazing if he had double-digit touchdowns in the first week.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure you would have to have him in your line.
Yeah, you would win every single contest. No, I'm with you. I don't know if I would do it in cash. Like, the Patriots are super interesting this week because of, obviously they're playing Miami, the worst team maybe assembled in football, and it's such a high spread.
That's why.
But yeah, so I would go Michel in tournaments where, like, Brady, I'm a little cautious to roll him out in cash as well. Like, who knows if he even plays in the fourth quarter. New England doesn't have to show their cards this week. I know Antonio Brown's there. They don't really have to do anything to win this game in Miami, just run the football. So I see where you're going. If they score 5 touchdowns, certainly 4 of them could be from their running backs. They can get inside the red zone and just run the ball. Like, that's definitely a possibility. So I think Michel is like a sneaky play in tournaments where people will just, like, to Joe's point, like, what's really the ceiling there? It could all go wrong for you in cash, but it could also go right where he does find the end zone 3 times. We've seen this before from New England, to your point with Blunt, and even most recently last year with Sony Michel, leading the team in red zone rushing attempts.
He's a better cash in my opinion. I still think he's good in cash. I still do. I think he's better on FanDuel because on FanDuel he's 6,800. The biggest thing that I look over on DraftKings is you brought up the person I should have never taken in my lineup last week. Facing the Cardinals defense at $6,000 is Mark Ingram. Staple lock, put him in. All Joe, I see he's smiling over there, so I'm assuming.
Yeah, again, like, I think I mentioned this last week. I just have like this weird bias because Mark Ingram just never makes it.
Yeah, he doesn't like Ingram.
I need to get over. That's why I was smiling. I need to get over that, I think. But yeah, I think we're going to be targeting.
He's facing your Cardinals.
Yeah, they are my Cardinals, but I try and put that aside. I think I'm actually better at putting that aside than like actual players that I don't like.
You can't look at the Cardinals defense. How can you put anything aside looking at that defense?
Yeah, that's what I mean. We're going to be targeting this defense all season, and at $6K on DraftKings in particular, I think that he's at least interesting over there too to kind of pay up to be a little bit more contrarian. He's only $100 cheaper than Austin Eckler, who's going to be just piled on DraftKings, I would believe. Where are you guys at on Saquon? I don't know what to do with Saquon because if he is going to be getting 3 quarters most games just because they're going to be blown out in a lot of the contests that they're in, I'm trying to figure out what to do with this guy that we were kind of projecting for this massive volume and target share, obviously, but I'm not sure what to do because his price hasn't moved.
Yeah, I'm with you in the fact that I'm just very hesitant on him just for the fact that, as you said, it was that usage. It was the usage even up to that point. You see the guy touch the ball and get 3 yards before anybody even blinks, and yet they still didn't give him 20 plus touches. Like it's just, and then as you mentioned, the game's out of control, and here comes Gallman, and then in comes Daniel Jones, and as the Buffalo defense,
he's 9,200 on both sides.
I know.
Yeah, like if you're a big cash game player, you can't do it. You can't take that risk.
No, if you told me he was getting 20 touches, I don't care if it's the Bills, I don't care if it's the Ravens, I don't care who it is. If you're giving 20 touches to Saquon Barkley or any of the top 4 running backs, I want it. But I don't, to your point, I think you have to pull off of him for that, especially when Kamara is less.
That's what I mean. When you see Zeke at $8,700 and you feel like he's going to have a heavier workload, Kamara at 82,
he's going to gobble up the Redskins.
Yeah, like those are 2 guys that people are going to spend down on, and maybe you get Barkley, probably do get him with a lower ownership in tournaments because of what happened last week and because we know the ceiling, what it could be, but after all, like to Joe's point, it is the Giants. If they're out of this game, they can't do a whole lot on offense. Maybe he does sit again in the fourth, and that really just that hurts you in cash. You just can't take that kind of risk and spend that kind of dough on somebody who you're not going to be able to get a good balanced squad. So he's a fade for me, in cash. But Jake, you mentioned Eckler. Like, how are we treating Eckler? Are we just avoiding him in tournaments altogether because of the ownership, or are we just because no Hunter Henry now? Looks like Mike Williams is sidelined. What we said last week, it was 28 carries and 13 targets in 2 games in December without Melvin Gordon. I mean, this guy played 75% of the snaps last week, 154 yards, 3 scores. Like, he should be the main part of this offense this week as well.
There's no way I'm avoiding him intentionally on DraftKings at that price at 6,100. I'll consider it at 75 on FanDuel just because at that price, you might be able to work with your lineup and drop down and pay down to go up elsewhere. That would make a little bit of sense. But at the price on DraftKings, like we've talked about this before, and I'm sure you said the same thing, Joe's. years past, like if somebody gets hurt midweek, like a perfect example would be Le'Veon Bell. Obviously, he's not on the slate, and that's not where we're going to talk about it. By the way, for everybody that's out there, this is a game that's not on the slate, but Sam Darnold is out for a couple of weeks with mono. Le'Veon Bell is getting an MRI. We don't know the results of that. But if Le'Veon Bell were to be out, Ty Montgomery, it doesn't matter if you're a tournament or not. You almost have to put him in lineups because of the price, because of the opportunity. It's kind of foolish not to. So that's why I kind of feel that way about Eckler on DraftKings, but not so much because of his price on FanDuel, Joe.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you. And I think another thing we kind of need to monitor too, and I'm not sure, do we have any news on Joe Mixon yet? Because I think that's an interesting play if we want to go to Gio Bernard. I think he's at 5,300 on DraftKings, so a little bit more expensive than Jacobs. So we'll have to kind of keep an eye on that as the week goes on too.
Yeah, I wish I could remember. There was one like 2 or 3 years ago where it was a running back, and the running back that came in midweek from an injury. People had that argument to your point, Chris, and they're like, well, everybody's going to own him. And that running back did exactly what we thought he could do and had like 100 yards and a touchdown. And it was like, you had to have him in your lineup because of the price save. It was actually dumb not to do it. So,
ironically, it may have been Ty Montgomery a couple of years ago.
No, it wasn't Ty Montgomery. I feel like it was with the Chiefs for some reason. And no, it wasn't last year. I said a couple of years ago. I feel like it was the Chiefs. Was it with the Chiefs when... It might have been when the Charles went down that one time, but anyway, we need to move on from that. Let's we got to get to
Spencer Ware.
Yeah. No,
Spencer Ware. I think that's who it was. I think it was Spencer Ware. I think you're right. So
yeah, he was my guy, man. We got to move on from this.
All right, let's move over to wide receiver. Yeah, actually, Kareem Hunt ended up doing it to Spencer Ware last year, so or 2 years ago, or was it last year or 2 years? Wide receiver. Let's move on.
First you're ripping on me to start the show, and now you're bringing up Spencer Ware. This is, honeymoon's over, I guess, week 2.
Yeah, get the hell off the show. We don't want you anymore. Wide receiver. Well, you get to go first, Joe, because Chris went first on running back. So there you go.
All right, so I think Tyler Boyd is going to end up being super popular this week, but I do kind of want to talk about John Ross a little bit. I know we're talking specifically about cash games, but what I like to do regardless is kind of build through running backs and try and figure out what some cheaper plays at wide receiver that would at least have some upside would be. So I'm kind of interested in John Ross. I think that a lot of people are kind of still disappointed in his start to his career, but he was a top 10 pick. So last week was actually his first game over 100 yards. We had 12 targets. So I do think that he's the least interesting. He's one of those guys that's really popping in the air yards type model. So he's seeing deeper targets. So I'm interested in him at his price, especially if a lot of people are going to be on Tyler Boyd.
Yeah, Ross is a good call. Like, not only just career high in yards, but like targets, catches by far. Like, this guy just wasn't really used over the past couple of years. So I like what Zach Taylor brings to the offense. I like that call as well. Just a little bit more expensive than him is Robert Woods. Mentioned him last week. Is just probably one of the safer wideouts in DFS, and it just remained true last week. I mean, Brandon Cooks had a down game, and Cooper Kupp was okay, but it was all Robert Woods. I mean, 8 catches, 13 targets, 70 yards. This is a high total game. He had success last year in a couple games against the Saints. So I want a piece of this offense, and he just seems like the safest one altogether, apart from Michael Thomas and Kamara.
I'm actually surprised that they're back-to-back and kind of like projected ownership, at least as of today, because I felt like John Ross would just be blowing Tyler Boyd away at this point after what happened in week 1. Chris and I talked about this and talked about from actually Bengals over at The Athletic is the fact that they're using John Ross as their number 1 now. They're using him differently, and that's the upside here. When we get to tournaments, here's a little tease. I actually think I'm fading both of them, but we'll get to that, the fact of tournament-wise and why I'm thinking that. So more cash game picks. Chris, another more for you?
Juju might be a better tournament play, but I like his price on DraftKings.
That's your bust of the year, dude.
It is my bust, and if only he played the Patriots every single week, I may be right. But for Juju, I think we can all agree it's a bounce back spot for a lot of Steelers in this offense, including Big Ben. He may be a tournament option for quarterbacks as well. But Juju at that price against Seattle, seeing what Andy Dalton was able to do, a career game like over 400 yards, talking about these Bengals, the game that they had, John Ross over the top, and obviously Tyler Boyd in the slot. So I think Juju is in for a dominant game. Now, keep an eye on him, of course, practice reports, but everything I hear is, he's going to be ready to go with that toe injury.
So you guys haven't brought up some more names. Go ahead, Joe, because I'm still waiting for 3 different names to be brought up.
Yeah, I'm assuming this is one of them. So I guess if Tyler Boyd doesn't end up being kind of where he's projected as of now, if it ends up being John Ross, that gets a little bit more chalky. A lot of people are going to be making the decision between John Ross and Tyrell Williams. So Tyrell Williams I'm kind of interested in that fade more than the Ross fade, just because I'm still kind of a little bit concerned that it's not really Derek Carr's game to throw deep anyway. And that's kind of what Tyrell Williams' game is. I understand the target share that he saw. He had 6 of 7 targets for 105 yards last week. And the benefit of getting a guy that's on Monday Night Football is his price didn't move, right? So he's only 4,400 on DraftKings. So I think Tyrell Williams is going to be super popular in cash. I'm not sure if he makes a great tournament play.
Well, that's fair. All right, so Chris, do you have another one to see if he can get? One of the 3 hasn't been brought up.
Let's see. You probably like Keenan Allen.
Keenan Allen's great. You know what?
What if Tyler Lockett doesn't play? What about DK Metcalf? You go that way in cash? What about no Lockett? If there was no Lockett?
No, I'm still not doing it. You saw how many targets Tyler Lockett got last week?
I don't want Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying if you took away Tyler Lockett, it still doesn't matter. It's only another 2 targets. That's my point. I'm saying it's still Russell Wilson. It's still the Seattle offense.
All right, I'm just trying to guess your boy.
Sammy Watkins probably.
That's not my boy. I'm just surprised nobody's brought up Sammy Watkins just because of no Tyreek Hill.
They priced him up fast. They got aggressive.
Yeah, they did. They
sides.
really did. Yeah.
So there's the question: do you want to pay up for them because it is? I mean, the volume in the Chiefs' offense. I mean, that's got to count for something, right?
I don't think I'd ever play Sammy in cash. I don't even care if Tyreek is out. Not at this price.
You know who the quarterback is, guys, right?
Yeah, I do. But I mean, I would just in cash again. It's just I want Kelsey. I want a little bit of safety there. I would just go Mahomes and Kelsey. Like that's a stack that I would pay up for. I mean, he's jumped up to Joe's point. He jumped up a lot, like $7,400. I would just rather take Woods. I think he's just a little bit safer and a couple $100 cheaper.
It just seems point chasey to me, and that's like what we're trying to like. The longer you play this, the more like these kind of decisions that you're trying to make. You're like, I've done this before and it didn't work out, right? So like, I'm probably more interested in someone like Mecole Hardman if he ends up keeping that kind of role that he was in with Tyreek going down. He's 4,800. I could see him getting relatively popular throughout the week as well, but I just would prefer to pay down and get a cheaper piece of the offense probably.
All right, so somebody else might be hosting the show next Thursday because I'm just going to tell you both you're nuts. And if I'm completely wrong, I'll just let somebody else do the show.
It's just cash. Like I would play Sammy in tournaments. Like I
played Sammy everywhere. 7,400 is still not that big of a price. He's the number one option, number one wide receiver for Patrick Mahomes. I like Mecole Hardman. Look, it's Sammy Watkins, and he's healthy, and he's 100% with Patrick Mahomes against the Raiders. I'm taking it all day long. The other 2 you guys didn't mention. Actually, you just brought up one of them, Robert Woods, in your conversation. So I actually like Woods and Kupp. Not Brandon Cooks in this because Brandon Cooks is actually got the Lattimore matchup for most of the game because he lines up on the left so much. Lattimore lines up on the right 2/3 of the time. Now, he's still not going to see him the entire game, but going to this game, I'm going to go with Woods and Kupp. And then the other one, Josh Allen with no potential turnover worries against the Giants. John Brown all day long, every day, smash that, every lineup. I don't care if it's John Brown and he is in cash for me.
Yeah, I played them last week. I got them both under 5% owned in that tournament. That's not going to be the case this year. It wasn't looking good most of the game, honestly. He was actually moving the ball pretty well. It's just those turnovers were just killing drives. But I doubt that happens this week. So I'm with you.
Yeah, written up in the DFS Ultimate Pass. I'm gonna go there again.
Speaking of this, just real quick, projected ownership as of today, Marquise Brown is still higher than John Brown. So there you go. Yeah,
yikes.
That's it.
Big yikes.
All right, we can come back to quarterbacks now. We can actually come back to them. We can because running backs and wide receivers. That's really, like I said, where the intrigue is. So Chris, cash game quarterback.
Well, we just mentioned him. Yeah, I mean Mahomes is pretty obvious for sure. You can spend up
just
for
so
him.
Expensive.
Yeah, he is. He's in both sites. Yeah, 75 and 9K on FanDuel. If you can make him work, there's absolutely no problem with Patrick Mahomes. Can't say anything bad about him.
Hold on. For everybody out there, DraftKings is super flat for quarterback compared. Like even so, Lamar Jackson's 800 behind him, and then it's 66, 65, 64, 63, 62. Like it's super flat. It's not 800. It's not that much on DraftKings to potentially pay up for Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, we talked about Lamar Jackson last week, and we said he was priced so low and he would jump up. I mean, $800 more on FanDuel, $700 more on DraftKings. Yeah, he's right up there now.
But third highest.
I still think his price is worth it, though. I really do.
He's ahead of Deshaun Watson, though.
I know
it's Jacksonville, but it's
for sure. But the guy this week is very similar floor, very similar, like what we expect is Joe just brought him up in Josh Allen. And we brought him up last week as well. I mean, 38 yards on the ground, that's that safety. It's like starting with a touchdown. He had the rushing touchdown and said last week that he led the team in red zone rushing attempts. Like he calls his own number. He ran 10 times. Like this guy runs. And what you just talked about the Giants, I mean, you compare him up with Brown if you want. I mean, if he's going to have throws to Beasley. Yeah, exactly. So I definitely like
Randall
Josh
Cobb
Allen.
of all people at this point of his career with that. Like he's the fourth option on that team. And
he's $5,300 on DraftKings.
Josh Allen. I'm going to have to buy a Josh Allen jersey, am I?
Yeah, you might.
I was so late to that last year. I'm like trying to make up for lost time, like force myself to play him last week. He's definitely in play for me this week as well.
He was a staple of the show here last week. People got annoyed of us talking about Josh Allen, but I mean, there's just this nice floor there with him. Yeah.
He's so terrible in real life and so much fun in fantasy.
He takes those shots downfield, right? 11.2 ADOT.
I know
was
he's
the highest of any
entertaining.
quarterback.
Well, and to your point, that's the thing. Is like he's so fun to watch because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you get both sides of it. Yeah,
he runs and throws deep. What else you want?
Exactly.
So, is there anywhere else you're looking, Joe?
Yeah, so Lamar Jackson, like his price is like just so scary to me. Like, are we ready to just like anoint him as like a real throwing quarterback after 1 week? I don't know. Like, I think
but he's not going to go 17 for 20 for 5.
Like, are you ready to play him over Deshaun Watson though? Like that. No. That's my thing. I think when you mentioned that's the thing that we have to think about.
Over Jacksonville, I would.
Well, yeah, but I think if we're still talking about cash games, you're probably right. Like Lamar probably makes more sense from that perspective since of the Watson kind of matchup there. But yeah, I think that it's interesting though when you can just get up to Patrick Mahomes at that point. Like the ownership's going to be flat at quarterback regardless. It totally depends on the value that opens up. We do have some pretty decent running back value this week. There's a couple tight ends that are super cheap as well. So if you really wanted to get all the way up to Patrick Mahomes, you probably could do that relatively easily this week.
It's probably more doable most weeks, or this week more than most weeks. Real quick before we get to tight ends, any Dak Prescott for you guys?
Yeah, I like Dak. I do think Zeke is going to be more involved, but I like Dak maybe more so as a tournament play because of that feeling. I mean, he's just owned this division as well. I mean, not only did he throw 4 touchdowns, against the Giants, I mean, he's got 13 in his last 4 games inside this division. So, I mean, it's a really good spot. I like his weapons. Joe was all over Gallup last week. There's a lot to like about this Cowboys team. They're really sound.
Yeah, I think Dak's at least interesting because of how well Washington played last week too. So like if this game is actually going to stay somewhat close, we know that Dallas is going to play a little bit more new age offense this year. So there's a lot to like with Dak, and the target share there is a little bit more condensed in some of the other situations. And that's always something that we can want to kind of attack because he's a little bit easier to stack.
I think you just spend up at the top, Jake. Like we talked about Mahomes and Jackson, and then like Watson, tough matchup, Rodgers, tough matchup. Don't know if Brady's going to play that much in the second half. Like Wilson doesn't throw the ball a ton. So I think you just spend up or you just take the value at the quarterback position.
Well, and to real quick, since we're talking about this game, not to backtrack to running back, I forgot to bring him up. I have Chris Thompson a ton because when this, basically the truth, Adrian Peterson doesn't catch the ball. And I don't think even if they somehow put some points on the board and Terry McLaurin's the real thing, I don't think they're going to be in a situation where we're going to be leading by a touchdown or 2 against the Cowboys. And if they're down, it's going to be the Chris Thompson show all day long. And he was already on the field more than Darius Guice, who we know is now banged up, but he was fine heading into that game. Well, at least we assume from reports. But I think Chris Thompson, especially, was he 3,900 on DraftKings?
3,900, yeah. 15 DK points last week. It's a good call.
That's huge. So let's continue to tight ends. Now, anybody, do you speak of the Patrick Mahomes paying up? Anybody paying up for Travis Kelce?
Yeah, I don't mind that strategy at all. Pair him up with Mahomes. What's wrong with that?
Never feels bad.
No,
I guess last week he kind of got a little bit bailed out with some longer catches, but he doesn't get in the end zone. Like, is that something we think is going to continue throughout this season much longer? Probably not.
No, Chris knows this. Do you remember, Joe? Do you remember last year what Kelce did in week 1 off the top of your head?
No, I played Gronk, and then I never played Gronk the rest of the year.
Travis Kelce, for everybody panicking about week 1. By the way, Matt Ryan was also QB 26 in week 1 last year. For purposes of a week 1 panic, Travis Kelce went 1 catch, 6 yards in week 1 last year.
Yeah, recency bias is such a thing, especially in DFS and especially after week 1, right? Where we've just been waiting forever for week 1. It finally happens and studs have disappointing games. People obviously automatically they just go away from them. And that's just a huge mistake. Kelsey's a stud.
So if you're not paying up for Kelce, do you guys want to take a guess who the current projected highest ownership is at tight end?
It's got to be Ingram, no? Ingram, Waller?
Nope.
Waller?
Nope.
Ooh.
Wow.
Keep going.
Kittle?
Nope.
Hawkinson?
There you go.
Wow. See, again, recency biases.
Everybody is all up.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, he went up 1,100 on FanDuel. He went down $100 on DraftKings.
3K.
He's 3K, and I think that's why, especially because of the DraftKings price, so many people are over. But let's talk about all three of the ones that are in there. The surprises, the surprises for some. A lot of us were on Mark Andrews and Darren Waller, but there were a lot of hesitancies about TJ Hawkinson. Of those three, because Hawkinson by far has the bottom price there, although he is much more pricey on FanDuel. Mark Andrews is 6,100 for reference, and then Delaney Walker's 59 in that range, just to bring him out of people that are in that range as well, and Waller's 54. So are we looking at Waller's the easy play on FanDuel, and then you have a conversation with these other guys on DraftKings? Because Waller's also 3,300 on DraftKings still.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that I think I still prefer Andrews to both those guys, especially if there is a discount on ownership there. 8 of 26 passes that Baltimore threw went his way last week. And if we're going to talk about Hawkinson, like it's the same matchup that he had last week. So they gave up 131 yards and 6 receptions to this guy. I honestly think that Andrews is probably the guy that you follow through with, especially because this game is going to be probably most likely going to be the highest paced game of the entire week. There's going to be points scored. There is some injuries on the Ravens side of the ball as well. So I'm not opposed to even game stacking this one completely, which we'll talk about when we get the GPPs, but I'm still kind of on Andrews. I think he's the follow through play.
Can we pause first? Did you say Holkinson, like your last name instead of Hawkinson? Did you?
I hope I did. If I actually did, please add me on Twitter and shred me for that.
Yeah, we're going to rename him the Holkinson. I like it.
I like it. Yeah, I like it too. I mean, that he's a freak. I said this to you, Jake, on our show on Wednesday. I think he needs like an average of 30 receiving yards the rest of the way, like per game, to break the tight end rookie record. And he probably does it. He really does. Yes, it is. It's very sad. But I mean, Stafford has been starving for a weapon at the tight end position for a long time, and he's going to utilize him. I like Waller. I think the price gap is more significant on FanDuel than it is DraftKings. I mean, Andrews $3,800, Waller $3,300, but on FanDuel, I mean, you're seeing Andrews at 61 and 54. And I like to spend down at the tight end position. I was just very impressed with what I saw last week. Joe alluded to it. Derek Carr doesn't like to take shots downfield. Look at Jared Cook's numbers last year as the guy in Oakland. Like, look at all the targets, all the catches, and all the success he had. I think Waller can have a similar path to success, and it is the Chiefs. Like, they're going to have to throw the ball. Like, game script does favor him.
All right. Well, then, if you want to go for the big money, let's get to it. Let's start talking some of the tournament plays for week 2.
You down with GPP?
You know me. Chris, you just talked a lot, so we're going to Joe first here. Haha. Joe, running backs. We're starting running backs again. Running back, tournament plays. Who you got on your radar?
Yes, you mentioned recency bias before, and I think one of the guys that burned people last week, Leonard Fournette, his price is still extremely nice on both sites for the type of volume we can kind of project there. And anytime we get like a disappointing performance the week before, I do think that it's interesting. Like the scare, obviously, is that he now has Gardner Minshew as his quarterback, which is a little bit terrifying. But Fournette still had 86% of the snaps in week 1, still saw 6 targets in the passing game. That's what I was watching for with Fournette in particular. So as long as he stays hovering around that 80% snap count range, I really like that. I think that Houston last week allowed 9 receptions to opponents out of the backfield as well. So I'm interested in going back to the well of Fournette, especially if people are scared off because of what he did in week 1.
Same sort of feel for me with Todd Gurley. We talked about him last week with just his price, and now I think there's more negative talk around him. A lot of people spending, fab in their season-long leagues on Malcolm Brown. Of course, he stole a couple red zone touches from him and ended up in the end zone. But Gurley dropped down $900 on DraftKings to the point where he's $7K, and he still had a game where he totaled 100 yards. Like, yeah, he put one on the ground in the end zone, but I don't think all of his in the red zone. I don't think all of his red zone touches are just going to be completely gone. So I think more people are off of him. The Rams have a team implied total 27.5. It's the 3rd highest on the main slate. I'd like it even more than last week because his price has just dropped down even more. So, and I think also, like I said, more people will be off of him. So I'm going to take a shot on Gurley again in tournaments at 7K.
All right, real quick before we continue on here, I forgot to even mention your cash game defenses. We forgot to. You guys didn't even say, "Hey, wait." We usually do.
Actually, Mike has done this before. He'll probably laugh at it when he's listening. We have skipped over cash game defenses and just talked about them at the end. But
okay,
we can go that way if you want.
No, screw Mike. I don't want to do it here. No, I told you there was going to be a new host for this show next week. So.
I like the Bears. If we're talking defense, I'm just going to roll with the Bears everywhere. Everywhere. Yeah. I'm surprised they're not the highest price team.
Well, they are on DraftKings.
They are on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, they're pretty cheap at 45.
So is that, Joe, is that the easy pick? Did you just do it on FanDuel and maybe consider something else on DraftKings?
Yeah, that's where I was on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I'm looking at the Steelers because they're 2,400.
2,400.
Yeah, they're home favorite at 2,400, right? It might just be as simple as that. For me, I think that the Steelers team I think is somewhat interesting, especially someone we didn't even talk about, James Conner, but pairing him with the Steelers in GPP is interesting. Like bell cow back, like no one really wants to play him at his price. We're talking about all these other guys but him. I do like the Steelers at 2,400 though, so I think they'll be one of my highest owned defenses.
Okay. Let's go back to it now. So we're back to tournaments. Hey, well, since we're talking about it, right in between the running backs, we might as well just get the defenses out of the way. Tournament defenses for you guys?
Yeah, I really like that call, Pittsburgh. I like Buffalo. I think Buffalo is interesting, and maybe we can go back to San Fran. I mean, Andy Dalton did have a good game, but when's the last time he's had 2 good games in a row? So, I mean, I don't mind the price with the 49ers. Maybe they're onto something with their picks. Maybe this is going to be their year where they just have a ton of
Just
picks.
Picture me doing the Kermit the Frog, like, all over the place, because I'm just going to loop something else to what you just said. Since we're talking tournaments and we're about to get to wide receivers, the reason I'm fading the Bengals, both Tyler Boyd and John Ross, is because the ownership concerns me with what you just said on top of it, Chris, is maybe we give some credit to the 49ers front 7 and what they just did to the Buccaneers and what they did to Jameis Winston and forcing those turnovers. And if so, the Bengals have a concerning offensive line. The Bengals might be without Joe Mixon. If Joe Mixon's on the field, he might not be 100%. There's just a lot of opportunity here for sacks for a quarterback that holds the ball and waits for plays to develop with Tyler Boyd and John Ross that could also lead to turnovers if they are. So I actually really like the 49ers as a tournament play. And like I said, to tie that into the wide receivers, that's why I'm off Boyd and Ross.
Yeah, I love that call. I think that the Patriots too. So like, I know it seems obvious, but anytime that a defense is like this high price, so top 3 as far as highest priced defenses on the slate on both sides, they sometimes go under-owned, right? Like, I don't know if I want to overcomplicate just targeting Ryan Fitzpatrick. Like, he completed 48% of his passes in week 1 through an interception. Like, it could get a lot worse in this game. So massive spread on this one. So if you're going to pay up to be contrarian, I think the Patriots are the one I'm on right now.
Okay. So let's move to wide receiver, since, that's kind of the progression we're supposed to be making here. Wide receiver tournament plays for you, Chris.
Well, we already mentioned Tyrell. I still like him though. Like I really find myself liking Oakland a lot this week because I feel like Kansas City is going to be able to have success. And, Joe also mentioned it, his ownership is probably going to be pretty high, and Carr doesn't take a lot of shots down the field, but I'm just not going to ignore what I saw last week, and I think that's a game plan. I think for the first time in a long time, Oakland has a feel like what they want to do, and I think it's because they have a strong run game, and they can rely on a guy like Jacobs, and they've just been using just mediocre backs over the past few years. So at $4,400, I understand that his ownership will probably be a little bit higher than what we want, but I'm going to take some shots on him, and what will probably be 50 plus points in this game.
So Jake was questioning my Arizona Cardinals love. So I'm going to come back with Christian Kirk and GPPs this week. I think is a phenomenal play with everyone kind of on Fitzgerald and what he did last week. I do think that it's at least interesting to look at Christian Kirk. Like, he still saw 12 targets last week. He did get that 2-point conversion as well. He's seeing deeper targets. I still think that Kirk is the guy that you want as far as upside versus Fitzgerald. We know what he does early in the season, but if you want a lower owned play in this game, and kind of Chris is a little bit bullish on Oakland, it sounds like. I'm kind of on the side of Arizona this week as far as teams that might go under owned that could end up being a decent way to go in GPPs.
All right, then let me ask you guys this, because we didn't talk about him in cash. Is it maybe tournament, or is it the price, or whatever? We haven't brought up the Eagles or the Falcons. And I know, we have to consider the fact that, again, different slate, but for people out there that might be playing on it, do we want to talk about that at all for Sunday night?
Get your Falcons in there. Absolutely. We saw with the secondary. Case Keenum started that game, I believe, 8 for 80, hit 7 different guys. Like, the secondary in Philadelphia is still as bad as what it was over the past couple of years, and they stopped the run pretty well. And if they're going to have success scoring points, teams are going to be throwing all over them. So, Julio is very obvious. But Calvin Ridley, Austin Hooper, like, these guys are going to have success. I like Atlanta a lot more than I do like Philadelphia's weapons.
I think that Julio is super interesting. Shout out Ian Hardis. If you guys check him out on Twitter, iHardis. He posted a tweet earlier this week. It was just talking about Julio's performances after facing Minnesota. We know Julio's actually been kind of held in check by Rhodes, but his ensuing performances are absolutely insane. 12 for 301, 7 for 139 and 1, 8 for 111 and 1. It just goes down the list. So I guess if you're just looking at that type of narrative, it's Julio's week to go nuts.
Yeah, he's going to have one of those games for sure.
Is DeAndre Hopkins facing the Jaguars? Is that a tournament play? Is that what we're considering that? Just because he's also so expensive?
For me, yeah. He is. He's a tournament guy. I just don't want to go there and cash. I just feel like there's enough value across the board, just a little bit more safety. I can't say anything bad about Hopkins, though. Like, it's like people listening, like, what do you mean you wouldn't play Hopkins? Like,
yeah, I was gonna say.
He's such a stud. Like, he doesn't matter who's on him. He's like we saw last week. Oh, like there was some talk about not playing him last week in showdowns or the 2-game slate because of Lattimore. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, he just schooled that guy pretty easily. Nobody can stop Hopkins.
I think those wide receiver cornerback matchups are just so overblown in general. Like even this week, like we're probably going to see super low ownership on Devontae Adams. I don't love the pace in that game against Minnesota, but like Devontae Adams has scored a touchdown, I think, in 5 straight games against Minnesota. So it's not like he is unbeatable. So I think that he's at least one that's interesting in the top end. And
Jake, there's one guy I wanted to talk about was James Washington.
Okay.
Yeah, because I feel like, again, I'm interested.
No, there's something. I'm going to bring up the name, and I hate to bring up the name after you do, but there is something. Yeah. Just go ahead.
I think I mean who you're going to bring up. But with James Washington, again, just seeing what Boyd and Ross, again, echoing that thought process with Juju and maybe Big Ben, because everybody just saw Monday night or Sunday Night Football in New England and Big Ben and this entire offense just looking completely trash. And I think we just have to talk about New England and how good they are and what they do on defense, and they take away the best opposing, blah, 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 all of that stuff. But James Washington at $3,600 really wasn't used at all in the first half, and I was wondering why. And then all of a sudden in the second half, you start seeing them take some shots downfield with him. This secondary in Seattle does not look good to start the season. So I think a solid tournament play. $3,600. Yeah, very putting it lightly. I think maybe we'll see Big Ben take a couple shots downfield. He's got that feel of like a Deshaun Jackson, a John Brown, but maybe not as safe, but good when we talked about last week. We're just taking these shots on these guys that are going to have high ADOTs and maybe we can get the touchdown. And like if you had Deshaun Jackson and Joe, I know you did in your lineups. I mean, you were loving it. He connected on 2 50-plus touchdowns. I mean, that's the kind of game that Washington could have.
Well, to go
Washington preseason hero.
Yes, that's right. I like him though. He's a burner.
Yeah, but on FanDuel at $100 cheaper, I'd even consider taking a flyer on Dante Moncrief because he's still the number 2. He's like, this, Chris. We said it on our show. There's a chance that Washington overtakes him this week because of what happened. But Ben Roethlisberger said he's got to go back to him. He's got to get used more. Part of it was his fault. And you bring up that point, and what I mentioned in one of my articles, and I'll put it on the DFS Pass too, just for everybody that might have missed it and not seen it, is the fact that you're talking about the secondary. Well, there's one specific person named Trey Flowers who saw 13 targets go his way against the Bengals last week. Of those 13 targets, 10 were caught for 170 yards and a touchdown. Right now, the way it lines up, he should see Dante Moncrief the most, but we know they can move around. And if it is James Washington might be the one to do the John Ross on him. So I'm with you, but I think Moncrief, it could be one or the other, but I think maybe one of them shows up in some tournaments.
Yeah, I think you take shots on both of them, and you get Vance McDonald involved too. I think the offense is going to be much better this week.
So before we get to stacks, which it sounds like that might be one of them, one last wide receiver that you guys haven't brought up, and then we'll talk quarterbacks and tight ends. Amari Cooper against the Redskins. That's why I didn't want you to, because you know how I feel about Amari Cooper, Chris.
Yeah, you don't like him
at all.
Does Joe? Joe, do you like Amari Cooper?
I'm more often just playing Michael Gallup and hoping for that deep pass. Amari Cooper, he's one of those guys that I never get right, so I've just like X'd him out of my team forever.
I think that's the feeling. Yeah, that's the feeling. And
Jared Cook. Remember how good of a matchup Jared Cook had last week?
He's had some massive games throughout the years. I think I've basically accomplished having zero exposure on every single one.
See? Because you can't pick them. You never know. All right, quarterbacks. Any really difference from what we're talking about cash games, or there's so much upside with our cash game quarterbacks as the same picks for tournament?
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. There's really it's quarterback, right? The ownership's so flat anyway that any of these guys. I think it depends on more of your roster construction and what you're doing with your stacks than just the quarterback. But I think Deshaun Watson. If everyone's just going to play Lamar at the same price, I'll probably have Deshaun Watson. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I do like that call. I mean, it would probably be pretty contrarian, pretty low owned if you go Watson Hopkins, and we know the upside is there. So I definitely like that call. It had the same sort of feel last week with Mahomes, right? Big Ben again, toss him out there. Brady, I think Brady, and we have that fear, of course, where what you said, Jake, it could be a big Sony Michel, Rex Burkhead, maybe all these backs, James White, all of them get in there. But I got to have Brady in at least one of my lineups, against Miami. Just seeing how they just put up 60 points. Baltimore just put up 60 points. Like, they could, if New England wanted to, they could put that up at half.
And I guess that's always the one downside to the Patriots is that they'll be up 42-0 and they'll still keep passing the ball. And they'll just we don't care. Sony Michel's back here. We're going to throw it 15 more times. So I could definitely see that. All right. Tournament tight ends. Is it similar to quarterback this week? Is it so flat after the big guys that it's just kind of pick your poison and just try to go for contrarian picks? Or Joe looks.
I got one.
He's feeling one.
I talked about this last week at tight end. I try really hard to either pay all the way up for someone like Kelsey Kittle that has like wide receiver 1 upside, or pay all the way down. That just allows me to do other things with my team. So any Mike Gesicki love, is this guy just dead to us at this point? 7th at the position last week in air yards. He had 6 targets.
Yeah, but they have to make him to him.
I don't hate it. Yeah,
he's basically Stone Min as far as his price. Like, I think he'll be a guy that's in my pool at least. And if I have to get there, he's going to be like under 5% owned.
Yeah. And Miami just they couldn't run the ball at all last week. So they're going to have to throw. Actually, I don't hate that call. If he can get you 5 catches in a game that they're going to be down a ton of points, he's going to return value.
He's seeing deeper targets for a tight end too, which is nice. Like his yards per route run, like as far as like how deep he's getting, like those are the situations you want if you take the name out of it completely.
No Jordan Reed or Vernon Davis. Just start the one and the other. You guys know how I felt about Vernon Davis last week. So
yeah, I mean, I think we all liked Vernon Davis. If Reed doesn't play Vernon Davis, I'll never play Reed. I don't think, because it's just one shot.
If I gave you 10 lineups, you wouldn't plug him in one.
No, you'd have to give me 15.
All right, 15 lineups. Plug him in one.
Yeah, plug him in one. But the chance of just him taking that one shot, that's all it is. We all know this now. He's had double-digit concussions now, and if it just takes one shot, he's done. In your entire day is just ruined from him. But yeah, it has to be like multiple lineups. Before
we get to the stacks, you brought up the name that I'm looking at. You talk about paying up. I actually think paying up for Kittle is interesting this week, because to go back to what we said, if the 49ers don't get after them, and maybe this is the game we expected the Bucs and the 49ers to be last week, and John Ross and Tyler Boyd can do what they can do, and all of a sudden they do have to pass a lot, and now George Kittle is getting involved, and maybe Matt... Actually, you know what? Real quick, nobody brought up Matt Breida in cash. Are we off Matt Breida? Do you not like Matt Breida?
I like Breida, but again, I don't know about Mostert. Like, is he going to get some carries too? I don't want to go that way in cash. I like to just take a running back that I think is going to touch the ball close to 20 times.
Joe, you didn't look like you were very happy.
Yeah, no, I think he's kind of priced out for me. Like, you can just pay down a little bit and go with Jacobs, or pay up slightly and get someone like Austin Eckler. Like, we talk about like the difference in price, 5,200, but Austin Eckler 900 more. I would have Austin Eckler every single time.
Okay, so let's talk stacks then, and this is going to be a fun one because I have a feeling you know where I'm going.
Stack attack.
I'm going first. Josh Allen, John Brown, Cole Beasley. Do it.
Stole it. Took it from me.
You love Cole Beasley, man. That's all.
I just love the people facing the Giants defense. I mean, that's the truth.
Fair.
Was that yours, man. Chris? Was that really yours?
It was Brown and Allen. Yeah, they're just so cheap. I love the price of Josh Allen on DraftKings, and
we got to get a third in there.
We're
for
just
a real
all
stack.
Brown.
Otherwise, you're just
for a real
pairing
stack. Hey, maybe Singletary. I mean, he caught a few balls in that offense last week. You can plug him in there.
You're not scared of Frank Gore and his 12 for 20 carries?
No, it took Buffalo a long time. I don't think Singletary touched the ball until 6 minutes left in the third quarter to realize what they have with him. But he's the guy there, not Frank Gore. I guess I'll go with a Breeze Kamara stack. I know Breeze is on the road, but that's not a bad combo. That I think there'll be some points scored in that game.
That's a combo.
Yeah.
We want a stack. We want 3, Chris. Come on.
Well, putting Michael Thomas in there too. Then
okay.
I
was curious if you were going to say Jared Cook.
Yeah, no, I'm not, and I'm not going to say Ginn either. Or I'm.
You know what the funny thing is? This is going to be the Jared Cook week because everybody's ticked off about last week. That's how it works.
It could be.
Yeah.
And it never feels bad to play Michael Thomas and Kamara and Brees together, right?
No.
I think that might be. I think it never
just
feels
does
bad.
if you start with those 3 and then you look at your money left, then it feels a little bit bad.
Yeah,
that's fine. You just got to play Gesicki then. Not a big deal.
I'd play Gesicki before I play Jared Cook.
That's fair. So Singletary, I think that at least is interesting what you guys are saying. He played 70% of the snaps, and Frank Gore only played 28% last week. I know that Singletary didn't really touch the ball much, but if they end up have to play a little bit more hurry up, like I was just happy that he was playing over Yeldon at this point. So in the passing game, I think he's interesting. The stack that I'm looking at, though, you kind of did it for me, Chris, when you said that no one's going to play David Johnson in that range. So I'm going to go Kyler Murray, David Johnson, fade Larry Fitzgerald, bring it and go with Christian Kirk, bring it back with my boy Mark Andrews at tight end. So I think that kind of full stack on this game that I think is going to be super high paced. Not a lot of defense is going to be played on the Arizona side, but on the other side of the ball too, like it's at least interesting that Jimmy Smith, it looks like he's going to be out as well. And there's going to be a couple backups for Baltimore's defense as well. So I'm not really scared of attacking Baltimore's defense. Like Murray, we know what he's going to do on the ground with his legs, at least hopefully a little bit more than he did in week 1, but 20 of 29 in the final quarter and OT last week. I'm interested in that sort of efficiency for a guy that's only 5,400 on DraftKings. I'm in on that. I think it's a relatively cheap stack too, so you can do a lot with it.
So Chris, let me ask you this, because we always like when we can get concentrated volume and concentrated targets and concentrated basically projectability. Is there any way I can get you to go with a Raiders stack, including Derek Carr? Because you got to take Derek Carr as your quarterback. Derek Carr, Tyrell, and Josh Jacobs, and Darren Waller. I want a quadruple Raiders stack in this game.
I mean, I said I like the Raiders. I don't know if I like them that much. No, yes. If I like Tyrell and Waller, I mean, sure. Derek Carr at $5,100 on DraftKings.
And then just leave Josh Jacobs off to the side?
Just leave Josh Jacobs off to the side then and go that way. I mean, a lot of people crap on Carr, but I mean, 6th in completion percentage last year, took the he was decent last year. Last week rather. He didn't do anything that got him into trouble. You know what I mean? Like, again, talking to Joe, he doesn't take a lot of shots downfield. I think he was like 2nd among qualified quarterbacks in ADOT last year. He just doesn't take those risks. He's all about just those quick little throws, and in fantasy, it's okay, I guess.
Joe legitimately almost fell out of his chair.
It's the play you make, and you just hate yourself. Like literally, not the first drive. Like I can't like put actual US dollars behind Carr. I just can't.
What about Canadian?
I'm sorry.
Could you
definitely would not put Canadian behind it as well.
Chris, come on.
Yeah.
Joe, on the flip side of it, I know you guys don't want Watkins, but could I get you on a Watkins, Kelsey, Mahomes?
Oh yeah, and you can stack up KC all you want. You're not going to get any pushback from me, and it feels right.
All right, last one for you guys. Any interest in potentially getting, because you brought him up before, if you pay up for a Hopkins, Deshaun Watson, and because Duke Johnson might catch 1 billion balls this year, as that trio? Because it's going against Jacksonville, and people are going to be so hesitant still on Jacksonville.
Are you buying into him catching that many balls now? Because, I saw last week 5 targets, 4 catches. I
told you my season-long projections, what was it, 52, was probably low. I told you that. I was just conservative, the fact that I wasn't sure what they were going to do with Carlos Hyde when they signed him. And we saw actually Carlos Hyde looked somewhat spry a little bit. It's clear that it doesn't matter. It's still going to be a ton of Duke Johnson.
Yeah, I think Kiki QT is going to return this week. Maybe that takes a couple targets away from him. But I feel like we can count on about 5 catches. As bad as that offensive line is, too, in Houston, they really have to do a better job of protecting Watson. But I think we can count on Duke as like 4 or 5 catches every week. And he's a much better play on DK than FanDuel.
As Joe, we'll get out here with this and then move on to our Battle Royal. Are the Jaguars a contrarian defense because of that offensive line to maybe get some turnovers and hits?
Potentially, but you got to remember that Watson's one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league under pressure. So I think that's something you're targeting, right? Like if you're going to get pressure on a quarterback, you want a guy that actually is going to make more mistakes. Like sacks are great. Like Watson's going to take sacks. I'll give you that. But he's also one of those guys that I'm not really actively targeting for that reason.
All right, so let's do our lineups this week in our Battle Royal, and I definitely... Well, you guys didn't even... we'll do it... Hold on. Let me do the drop first.
DFS Battle Royale.
You guys didn't even give me your scores. I talked about how I shouldn't have changed my lineup, and you guys didn't tell me what you scored. You guys tell me what you scored on FanDuel.
I for sure took last, but I'll check one second.
I don't know.
I don't remember. I think I did some quick math.
There's a button called History, Chris. Go look at it.
I made a lot of changes since Thursday's show, so I don't know if I had the exact lineup in there. But I believe, like, doing some quick math, I wrote down some guys. I got the sheet here when we wrote them down. I believe, Jake, you won. Well, we all had CMC, and the difference, right, I believe, with the lineups was, Evan Ingram. Like, and Joe and I had OJ Howard, and I think that was the difference with the 23 FanDuel points for Evan Ingram.
116 points. Anyone that beat me last week on FanDuel definitely blow up my Twitter.
Yeah, my rough math was Jake 140, you 115, and me 120. But not great, guys.
It's still not great. So we want to pick it up for everybody in general this week. Who wants to go? You know what?
You might as well go first.
No, I was going to say whoever went last gets to go first. So they can have
whoever finished last.
Yeah. So you have the opportunity in case we have some of the same players. Maybe we can make a change. It's kind of like reverse
live changing.
Yeah, it's draft order.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Like I'm not approaching this to try and beat you guys. I'm throwing this in the Sunday Million every week. So I'm still gonna go kind of towards more of a GPP approach. I'm actually going to go with the stack that I just talked about. If everyone's just going to play Lamar, I'll play Kyler. Keep the change on that one. Kyler, David Johnson, Christian Kirk. Bring it back with Mark Andrews on the other side. He's only 6,100 on FanDuel. And then outside of that, I'll go with my boy John Ross. 6,400 seems like a great price for him. At wide receiver, Alvin Kamara. You guys know me. He's going to jam in as much running back touches as I can. And then James Conner with the Pittsburgh defense. I really like that correlation, especially if people aren't going to play Conner because he's a little bit kind of banged up. At least I was kind of seeing that. I could be totally wrong on that. But I see a Q next to his name. What's the Q mean, Jake? That's going to scare people off him, hopefully. It's probably me too. But then the last guy is Devontae Adams. I mentioned it before. Like, no one really wants to play Devontae Adams against Rhodes, but he's done fine against him the last few games. 5 games in a row, I believe he scored a touchdown heavy site, getting to Adams at significantly lower ownership to someone like Hopkins, something I'd want to do in a GPP. So that's what I got.
All right. Well, I'll go next then. I got Josh Allen at the quarterback position, and I'm going to go with 2 pretty chalky running backs here in Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler, but I'm okay with it. Robert Woods, John Brown, and James Washington. A couple deep threats there that I think will be okay. Darren Waller at the tight end position, and I am going to roll out Todd Gurley. I'm going to back it up. Not just saying it, guys, just for the heck of saying it. I'm going to roll out Todd Gurley there in the flex spot, and I'm going to go with the Bears. I think they're just at $4,500. This is a defense I have a lot of exposure to on FanDuel.
The Bears.
Real Canadian dollars on Todd Gurley.
Is that right? Real Canadian dollars?
Yeah, I mean, it cost me a lot of money.
You took some of my guys. I think we're differentiated. Can you say that? Differentiated? Can you say that in the past tense? Did I make that? Either way. Did. Yeah, we're just making a whole bunch of crap today. Like, the fact is, I think my lineup is different enough because I already told you I was going Josh Allen, Cole Beasley, and John Brown, so I went with all 3 of them.
Oh, wow, you really do hate the Giants.
Come on. I mean, seriously, if I could get Gettleman fired personally, I would do it. I 100% would do it. So this defense is miserable, but that's the truth. So Allen, Brown, Beasley to start my stack. I am pairing up another one because you mentioned Eckler. I'm going Eckler and Keenan Allen. I don't feel like Keenan Allen's getting enough love for what I think is going to be the fact that we talk about condensed volume and targets. I mean, really, Mike Williams is banged up. Even if he's out there, we talked about it last week. My concern was that offensive line having to get the ball out quick, and now there is no Hunter Henry. Eckler and Allen are in my lineup. I do have Kamara like you do, Chris. And then for my final 3 spots, got to put my money where my mouth is. Josh Jacobs is back in my lineup at the flex spot. Kittle at the tight end, and I'm pairing Kittle up with the 49ers defense against the Bengals, which I know is a little bit not the best sense, but you still at that point, the turnovers, even if it gets pass heavy is where I'm going with the 49ers. So any final word for everybody out there? Make sure, again, before I get to the final words, reminder, you can get 10% off the DFS Pass where Chris has work, I have work, tons more DFS content on there. Just put in podcast, you get 10% off. Joe Holka's at Joe Holka. Chris Meaney's at Chris Meaney. I'm at All In Kid. You can get all additional advice hitting us up on Twitter, especially Chris Meaney because he always tells people to come after me. So make sure you go after Chris Meaney and clog up his timeline.
It's fair. Yeah,
before we get out of here, Joe, any last bit of advice or words for heading into week 2?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot, honestly. Check out the video. Yeah, check out the video version, I guess, on the YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel. You'll get to see me almost fall over in my chair when someone brought up Derek Carr. But yeah, that's all I got.
and maybe just play Derek Carr in a win-one tournament lineup. Try it out.
Or that.
Yeah.
Chris?
That's it. That's all I got, man. Play Derek Carr in a tournament lineup.
Just play Derek Carr?
No, you said it. You said off the top with the DFS Pass, and there's a lot of articles there, a lot of great minds writing some, just showdown matchups, cash, tournament strategy, get ownership projections, the whole works. So I would check out the DFS Pass, not too late. And I guess before we're on our way out, don't overreact to week 1.
Oh wait, because we should have just everybody was the best and everybody's the worst at the same time. Yeah, Travis Kelce sucks last year if you remember, but we don't suck. We'll see you next week. It's the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. We love you, Foot Clan. Have a good luck in week 2.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at www.thefantasyfootballers.com.